Attention, first grade, class 3, Tyler. Please come to the staff room immediately. Tyler, that's my name. Just as the announcement said, I'm in my first year of middle school. The call came just as the 5th period was about to end, and I unwillingly became the center of attention. I had no idea why I was being summoned, but they said it was urgent, so I ran through the still empty hallway to the staff room. After knocking and entering the staff room, I stated my class and name, and looked around just as the end of day chimes sounded. The staff room, just after classes had ended, was sparsely populated with teachers. It seemed that the vice principal was the one who had called for me. I rarely ever spoke to him, so with a nervous tension, I approached, and the vice principal solemnly began to speak. We just got a call from the police. Your parents have been in a traffic accident. The sudden news didn't make sense to me. I was told to hurry to the hospital and was handed a note with the hospital's name, phone number, and the emergency contact. The school had called a taxi for me, and without fully grasping the situation, I was ushered into the cab. As soon as I got in, I showed the note to the driver, and the taxi headed to the hospital. I arrived at the hospital quickly but was unable to see my parents. I was told they had been in an accident, but there was no sign of the person who must have hit them. Of course not. It was a hit and run. As I waited alone in the empty lobby, eventually my grandfather showed up. He was my paternal grandfather, living in the neighboring town. He had been living alone since my grandmother passed away a few years ago. And as the day turned to night, my maternal grandparents and uncle also arrived, but seeing this group together made me uneasy. The last time I saw them all together was at my grandmother's funeral. Ultimately, the day passed without me being able to see my parents. My grandparents were called in first. A little later, a nurse took me somewhere else. We rode the elevator, and the nurse pressed the button for the basement's lowest level. I had had the same experience when my grandmother died, though it was at a different hospital. The elevator stopped, and as I followed the nurse, I thought to myself, just as I suspected. In that room, which I wouldn't exactly call chilly, 2 figures lay covered with cloths over their faces. But I still couldn't believe those 2 were my mom and dad. After all, I hadn't seen their faces yet. The silence was broken by a nurse, who then lifted the cloth from their faces. There they were, my mom and dad. Yet, strangely, I still couldn't feel the reality of it. Just the day before yesterday, we were talking normally, and on the day of the accident, they had seen me off to school with smiles. How could this have happened? I was filled with hatred for the person who caused the accident and ran away. If they had just called for an ambulance right away, maybe my parents could have been saved. Was this some kind of cruel joke? Maybe they're just asleep, and they might wake up any minute. Part of me thought this, while another part was strangely calm, thinking my brain just hadn't caught up yet, and maybe with time, the reality would sink in. But time waits for no one, and soon the wake, the funeral, and the cremation were all over. After a few days without my parents, I resolved to live on my own, but a middle school kid can't just live alone in a family rental. I wanted to stay in the home I had shared with my parents, but my grandfather, who lived alone too, decided to take me in. I spent most of my time on the move and the subsequent paperwork, with hardly any time to say goodbye to my friends, and the days flew by in a blur. Then the life with my grandfather began. But he was living on a modest pension. Maybe if he had been a public servant, he would have had a decent pension, but he was just a retired salaried worker. Living on a meager pension, I wondered if the 2 of us could really make ends meet. With these worries, my new life started. I had to move to the next town and change schools. At my old school, I hadn't joined any clubs, which had been okay, but here, it seemed like every student was expected to join one. Thankfully, a teacher, understanding my situation, allowed me to be an exception. Being the new kid, My seat was at the back of the classroom. The other students had already formed their own groups. Could I blend into this new community? Did they know about my situation? What would I say if they asked about my home? My anxiety didn't end at home. It followed me to school too. Without the courage to speak up, I sat alone until a boy from my class approached me. After introducing himself as Henry, he started barraging me with questions. When he asked about clubs and I honestly said I wasn't joining any, he seemed really bothered and kept pressing. Why not? I explained that at my old school, clubs weren't mandatory, and because of family circumstances, I wasn't joining here either. But rules are rules, he snapped back at me. I didn't feel like sharing my whole life story right then and there, and I didn't want to deal with him, so I brushed him off. But Henry got heated and grabbed the back of my collar. I quickly grabbed his shirt front in response. Classmates intervened to break us up, and the commotion brought our teacher running over. But Henry still hadn't cooled off, raising his voice. "You're just living a pool life with your granddad, right? That's why you can't join a club." The homeroom teacher, shouting "Stop it," took Henry to the staff room. Seeing that Henry knew about my situation made me think maybe others knew too. I didn't know how Henry found out. Maybe he overheard the adults talking in the staff room. After finishing scolding Henry, the homeroom teacher returned to the classroom and told me, "Don't worry about it." After school, when I got back to the house where my granddad was waiting, he immediately asked how my day went. How was school? I told him it was a lousy school and about the trouble with Henry. But then, "That doesn't mean the school's lousy, just that classmate," he said. I was expecting some comfort, for him to be on my side, but his response disappointed me. After all, wasn't it because of Granddad that I was in this mess? The thought bubbled up inside me. If I could have lived on my own, I could have continued at the same school without any changes. I wouldn't have needed to go to a school with such a messed up guy. It's because Granddad took me in that I ended up at this lousy school. Grandfather didn't seem interested in my complaints, just glancing at me and saying nothing. Maybe feeling awkward, he left to go shopping and came back with vegetables and Chinese food ingredients. He put the groceries in the kitchen and started cooking rice. He was used to it. I thought maybe once the rice was done, conversation would naturally follow, but time didn't resolve the tension. School, my parents, and the future. There were things I wanted to talk about, things I needed to say, but my granddad and I didn't exchange a single word, silently eating our dinner instead. Days passed, and back at school, Henry kept picking on me whenever he got the chance. Conversely, at home, my grandfather and I barely spoke, except about meals. When this was starting to feel like the new normal, I came home from school to find my grandfather lying on the bed. "Tyler, you're back?" he asked. It had been a while since we had exchanged words about anything other than food, but finally, we did. Apparently, he had fallen off a ladder while pruning the trees in the yard. He didn't hit his head or back, but instead, he twisted his leg. That reminded me of the ladder and shears left out in the yard. After discussing it, we decided I would handle the shopping and chores for a while since he couldn't. "I've written everything we need, and here, take this," he said, handing me a note and a supermarket flyer. It was printed with big yellow letters that read "Big Sale." It seems I had to shop there today. Taking the wallet he handed me, I biked to the designated supermarket. I had been there a few times before we moved. It wasn't particularly cheap compared to other supermarkets in the area, but their sale items were a steal. This reminded me of something my mom used to say. Inside the supermarket, I saw signs for sale items everywhere. As I was looking for the items on the list, I unfortunately ran into the last person I wanted to see. It was Henry. Seeing him at school was stressful enough, let alone bumping into him after school too. Just as I was about to hide, Henry spotted me. Hey, if it isn't the Pua kid, I guess you can only shop on sale days because you're so broke, he sneered. If that's your logic, then everyone shopping here today is broke, including you, I retorted. A cough from afar interrupted Henry's words. Realizing his comments had made enemies of most of the customers, he tried to switch the subject. But even the change in topic was just more insults aimed at me. To make matters worse, he brought up my deceased parents, saying, "Even if your parents were alive, you'd still be broke." His words made me lunge at him in anger. Henry fought back, but store employees quickly intervened. I could see other shoppers pointing at us, so someone must have called them over. We were quickly separated, and the store warned us that if there was another disturbance, we would be banned. I was still steaming, but I knew making a scene wouldn't help. Yet, as I finished shopping and was about to check out, Henry was waiting for me. "Let's take this outside," he provoked. It was when I took a step forward, falling for Henry's provocation. "Hold on." Suddenly, I felt a tug on my shoulder from behind. Turning around in surprise, I saw it was my classmate Anna. She stands out in class, being the daughter of the president of a rather well-known company. When I first heard she was a corporate heiress, I was surprised, but honestly, she doesn't act like a princess at all. Even during breaks, she's just like any other girl, chatting with friends about TV and family stuff. "You don't need to stoop to his level," she said. Annoyed that a third party was intervening, I shrugged off Anna's attempt to stop me and turned back to face Henry. "You better back off. This is a world you wouldn't understand, princess." "And who do you think you're talking to? How dare you speak like that?" she retorted. From Anna's tone, it seemed like Henry couldn't talk back to her, maybe owing her a favor or something, but apparently that wasn't the case. "It's none of my business," Henry snapped and lunged at Anna. I rushed to intervene, but Anna's kick found its way between Henry's legs. With a blow that no man could shrug off, Henry doubled over in pain. I thanked her, still in shock, and she just smiled back and said, "No problem." Henry is certainly annoying, but causing trouble here isn't what your parents would want. You have to carry on their will, Tyler. Confused by her words, I just stood there until she suggested we talk over coffee. "Order whatever you like, it's on me." I was annoyed at being dragged into a cafe with no money, but since she was paying, I ordered a hot tea. As our orders were placed on the table, we both let out a sigh of relief. Then, Anna started to speak. "About what happened earlier," she began, and with a somber face, she revealed something unbelievable to me. It turns out that the accident that led to my parents' death was caused by Henry's uncle. Since it's his uncle on his mother's side, they don't share the same last name. That's why maybe the teachers knew, but none of the students did. Still, it felt strange that Anna knew all this. "So how do you know all this?" I asked. "Henry's uncle used to work at our company," she disclosed. That's when it clicked why she had earlier reprimanded Henry so confidently. Anna went on to give more details. Apparently, Henry's uncle was a troublesome person, and even Henry's family was burdened by him. He was a gambling addict, often showing up at Henry's house unexpectedly to ask for money or calling persistently. And amidst all this, he caused the accident. Moreover, it seemed that the car Henry's uncle was driving at the time of the accident was a company car. He'd cleverly erased any dent and blood stain, as if nothing had happened, and kept quiet about it to the company. After the incident, maybe in an effort to make up for the fine, his nuisance behavior intensified. Observing Henry's actions, I can't help but think there's a streak of scum in the family DNA. Not that Henry himself is to blame, so it's hard to hold it against him. That's why, honestly, I owed you an apology too, Tyler. I'm sorry. You don't have to apologize, Anna. Your dad and his company are victims too, right? As we talked, I realized a lot of time had passed since I left for shopping. Even if I went back now, dinner would be very late. I was going to buy some takeout as a wasteful option when Anna offered to buy dinner for both of us. It seemed like an apology for holding me up. When I got home, my grandfather seemed worried and asked if something happened. He wanted to know everything, including the takeout I was carrying. I explained everything that had happened at the supermarket, what Anna told me, and how she even paid for our dinner. "So, you're in the same class as Anna," my grandfather remarked. He didn't seem surprised by the story I relayed from Anna. The only thing that seemed to catch his attention was that Anna and I were classmates. He mentioned that Anna's grandfather was his childhood friend. The company now run by her father was originally started by her grandfather. There was one thing my grandfather didn't know, that Henry was related to the offender. But he had heard everything else from the police and had even gone to settle matters with Anna's grandfather himself. To my grandfather, it was the accident that took the lives of his son and daughter-in-law. To Anna's grandfather, it was an accident that smeared mud on the company's face and took away a friend's family. The company was already set to provide full support for the upcoming lawsuit, including financial and manpower resources. While I was at school, my grandfather had been doing all he could for my parents and me. Unaware that my grandfather had been taking such actions, I had unfairly felt disappointed. Reflecting on the argument we had the other day, I apologized to my grandfather. But he dismissed it, telling me not to worry about adult matters and to focus on my studies. However, I wanted to help too. So, I decided it was time to express my honest feelings. I can't move forward emotionally or physically until the lawsuit is settled, and there's still so much uncertainty in our lives, with school and everything, I confessed. "I'm sorry. If we had even a fraction of Anna's family income, you wouldn't have to feel any financial insecurity about the future." My grandfather apologized for not being able to provide a better life for me. Having money wouldn't bring Dad and Mom back to life, nor would it have saved them. Besides, living with Grandpa is pretty fun too, you know. At my words, my grandfather looked up briefly before looking down again. After hearing from Anna and learning about the covert actions my grandfather had taken, I felt a bit comforted. I realized that my parents had been treasured and, even though they were gone, they had not been forgotten by everyone. As I finished talking, my grandfather didn't lift his face and headed to the washroom on his injured leg. He said he was sleepy because he had waited up for me and wanted to wash his face to wake up. But hidden in the sound of running water, I occasionally heard the sound of sobbing. When I noticed this, I inadvertently started crying. True to what my grandfather had told me, trials are slow. The trial for the accident that occurred in my first year of middle school didn't start until the end of my third year. Thanks to Anna's cooperation, we were able to secure a sizable compensation in the civil case as well as the criminal one, and the once strained conversations with my grandfather had increased. After I graduated from middle school and was in my second year of high school, I was contemplating my future path. Considering my grandfather's care, a job nearby seemed sensible. However, I thought he would be upset if I told him, so I kept quiet, but my homeroom teacher must have informed my grandfather without my knowledge. "Now that the trial is over, you should be able to move on. Are you moving forward now?" This clearly meant he wanted me to pursue further education. There were no financial issues regarding going to college because my grandfather had saved the compensation money. He started doing the household chores again so I could focus on my studies. This meant I couldn't say I wanted to find a job close to home to help my grandfather. The tree that had caused his injury had been completely cut down to eliminate any danger. This same thoroughness had probably helped during the trial preparations. With such careful planning, as if to say I could manage on my own, I decided to go to college as my grandfather wished. I got into university and started living by myself. I often went back to visit my grandfather, but there was a topic he seemed more interested in than my well-being. It was whether I had gotten a girlfriend or not. "I'll bring her over when I have one," I said. "So you don't have one now?" he'd retort. We kept up our friendly banter despite living apart. But in my second year of university, my grandfather fell. And during the spring break of my third year, he passed away. As if choosing a time when it wouldn't affect my classes, my grandfather passed away quite suddenly. With help from relatives on my mother's side, he was laid to rest in the same grave as my parents. I was saddened, but this time I wouldn't escape from reality. I resolved to fully acknowledge my grandfather's death and live my life straightforwardly. While visiting the grave on the monthly anniversary of his death, I ran into Anna by chance. "It's been a while," she said. Startled by her sudden greeting, I agreed to catch up as she suggested, just like that time before. We ended up at the same cafe we had visited together. Since I hadn't really talked to her since middle school graduation, this could be the first time since then. We caught up on old memories, shared updates about college life, and generally had a lively conversation. Then Anna surprised me with an unexpected suggestion. "Hey, you should come visit my place sometime. My grandfather wanted to talk to you," she said. Anna and her grandfather had come to my grandfather's funeral, but it had been too hectic to talk much then. I told her I would visit if I had the chance, and then she surprised me further by offering, "Why don't you come to intern at our company?" Her company was indeed a major firm, and as a place for an internship, it was impeccable. I accepted her invitation, and we exchanged contact information. I processed the internship for my university and was able to participate successfully. During the internship, I was actually called in by Anna's grandfather, the chairman, which was a bit nerve-wracking, but I managed to have a little conversation with him. He shared stories of his childhood with my grandfather, and then he asked me to tell him about what my grandfather was like when we lived together and about his last days. While we both got a little teary-eyed, I shared all about my grandfather, and we reminisced about him. "Next time, let's have a meal together with Anna too," the chairman said, and with that, I left his office. Since then, I've become a senior in university and received an early job offer. It was from Anna's grandfather's company. Anna herself had decided to work at a different company, saying she didn't want to rely on her family's influence. The truth was, she had other things she wanted to do. I was at the cemetery to give an update at the grave. Standing in front of the grave, I feel like my father, mother, and grandfather are all there to greet me. "Dad, Mom, Grandpa," I leaned on Anna until the end, "but I'm about to become a working adult soon. Thank you for raising me this far." Perhaps I should have said these things while they were still alive, but if I had, my grandfather would probably have said there was no need for such thanks. That's just the kind of person he was. This is the story of my 8 years since losing my parents and living with my grandfather. My name is Steve. I'm turning 46 this year. I work in sales at the American branch of a Spanish electronics manufacturer. I've always enjoyed my job, where I can use my Spanish skills that I've been good at since my school days. It's fun and very rewarding. When I was younger, I spent about 3 years assigned to our headquarters in Spain, and I've been back several times for training and business trips. Because of my busy life, I never had time for romance, and without many chances to meet someone, I remained single well past 45. But last year, fate stepped in. On my way back from visiting a client, as I was walking down the main street in front of the station, a tall man walking in front of me suddenly collapsed. He was clutching his abdomen in pain and groaning. I rushed to his side and crouched down, asking, "Are you okay?" But when I looked at his face, he seemed like a foreigner. Then he spoke to me in Spanish. "My chest hurts. Please call an ambulance." Understood. I'll call one immediately. I responded in Spanish too and dialed 911 on my cell phone. While I was on the phone, a woman approached us. What's happened here? She looked to be a classy woman, about 60 years old. This man says he's having chest pains, I explained. Then she spoke to the fallen foreigner in Spanish. I'm a nurse. Can you tell me exactly where and how it hurts? After that, she neatly placed her rolled-up jacket under the man's head and checked his pulse while asking about his condition. When the ambulance arrived, she explained the man's condition in detail to the paramedics and accompanied them in the ambulance. Watching her take charge, I thought she was pretty impressive. I saw her again when my dad, who lives alone, was hospitalized for colon polyp surgery. She was the nurse in charge of my dad's room. Hey, you're the one from the other day. Oh my, thank you for that time. It seemed she remembered me too. Thank you for that time too. You were a lifesaver. Was that man okay? Yes, because you called the ambulance right away, she said with a bright smile. You're really good at Spanish, aren't you? Not really. It's all self-taught. You studied Spanish by yourself. Yeah, I've always loved watching movies and foreign TV shows, so I got interested in Spanish. I learned by watching language programs on TV and buying books. That's impressive. It seemed like you could speak Spanish too. Well, I work for the American branch of a Spanish company, so I can speak a little. Really? Have you ever been to Spain then? Yes, I have. She too had been to Spain on a trip. After that, we started talking every time we saw each other. Her name was Michelle, and she was about to turn 60. She was a cheerful person with a lovely smile, and talking to her was so enjoyable. I always wanted to chat more. Looking back, I realize I was totally smitten with her from the first glance. The age difference didn't matter to me. She was such an attractive woman. In our conversations, I learned she was divorced and currently single. Michelle has a daughter, but she's married and has left the house. So, I figured it wouldn't be a problem to ask her out. With that in mind, on the day my dad was discharged from the hospital, I asked her for her contact information. She readily agreed, and we exchanged numbers. Then, right after I got home, I asked her out to dinner. Since then, we've had dinner together several times and gone to the movies. The more I learned about her, the more I was drawn to her charm. She was kind and considerate to everyone, always bright and positive, and whenever I was tired from work or had something bothering me, talking to her would cheer me up. After about 6 months of dating, I proposed to her. Michelle, will you marry me? When I showed her the ring I had prepared and told her my feelings, she looked at me with her big, teary eyes and said, Are you sure an older lady like me is okay? Age is just a number. I've got my heart set on you, Michelle. I can't imagine being with any other woman. I want to live the rest of my life with you, I said as I took her hand, and she began to cry. Thank you. I want to spend my life with you too, Steve, she answered. And with that, she accepted my proposal. She had decided against having a wedding ceremony, but when she turned 60 and retired from her nursing career, I seized the moment to take a 10-day vacation. We went on a honeymoon to Hawaii. This trip was not only a celebration of her 60th birthday but also her retirement, so we really went all out. We stayed at luxury hotels and ate at 5-star restaurants. Since I'd been single until I was 45 and didn't have any expensive hobbies, I had a good amount of savings. That's how we managed to go on such an extravagant trip. Michelle was overjoyed. Seeing her having the time of her life, like a young girl, I knew it was worth it. Returning from our trip, about 6 months into our married life, one morning, as usual, I headed to work and was called in by my boss. The president of a major client from our headquarters in Spain is coming to America with his wife for a trip. We'll be hosting a dinner reception, so please attend with your wife as well. My boss, Director Frank, said that and then specified the date and time. I'll let you know the venue once it's decided. Understood. As I was jotting down notes in my planner, Frank suddenly laughed. Ha! Well, I've heard you got yourself a wife. I was starting to think you'd end up a bachelor for life, but good for you for finding a woman with such unique tastes. Those scornful eyes were staring at me. Frank is only 2 years older than me, but his pride and joy has always been his much younger and beautiful wife. And he's always taken every chance to mock me. Stuff like, you must be lonely being single at your age, or there's no way a woman with any sense would want to marry a guy like you. He's looked down on me forever. But to still be hearing this kind of taunt even after I got married. I was fed up with it, but kept my silence. Worried that my wife would be subject to some unpleasant comments if I introduced her to such a boss, but since it was an order, I had no choice. We would have to attend. On the day of the dinner, I took Michelle to the designated restaurant. It was a high-end place for Italian cuisine. When I mentioned the name of the organizer to make our reservation and was led to the private room, there were Frank and his wife. Frank had every reason to brag. His wife indeed had the beauty of a model. Sorry to keep you waiting, Frank. As I greeted him, my boss Frank looked over his wife, who stood behind him, and said, Steve, why did you bring your mom along? I thought the deal was you'd bring your wife. Hearing that, I felt my blood boil. Frank had a spiteful smirk at the corner of his mouth. He probably knew exactly what he was doing. Saying it on purpose. Harassment like this is almost a form of art. That's not my mother. Let me introduce to you. This is my wife, Michelle. Michelle, this is my boss, Director Frank. Oh, my apologies. You're his wife. I mistook you for his mother because of your distinguished appearance. Frank continued with such rude remarks. Glancing over, I noticed that Michelle was giving a strained smile while remaining silent. She was forcing a laugh, but I bet it was hurting her on the inside. I couldn't forgive Frank for hurting my wife. If he dared to say something that insulting again, I resolved to hit back hard next time. After a while, our client from the headquarters, Richard, showed up with a young employee as his guide. Nice to meet you. I'm Richard. Excuse me, but my wife Emma is currently in the restroom, so I'll introduce you to her shortly. Richard said that in Spanish. Frank and his wife, as well as Michelle and I, all introduced ourselves in Spanish. It seemed like Frank's wife wasn't very good at Spanish. Apart from stating her name, she barely spoke, and whenever Richard asked her something, Frank answered for her. In contrast, Michelle, whose Spanish was fluent, was happily chatting with Richard. Seeing this, Frank and his wife looked displeased. Anyway, Steve, how did you get up the nerve to marry a woman so much older than you? Frank started speaking in English abruptly. No matter how well she speaks Spanish, what's so good about a lady that looks her age? Everyone knows younger women are preferable. Or maybe you've got a thing for older women. How old is she, anyway? Frank was speaking his mind without restraint. Indeed, Michelle did look her age at 60, and certainly didn't look young. But she had a beauty that comes with age, and her personality was wonderful. That's why I fell for her. To have her ridiculed with such harsh words. It felt like a complete denial of my love for my wife. Boss, don't you think that's incredibly rude? I said, my fist clenched and shaking. What? You're going to talk back to me, your boss? Frank said with a smirk. Richard, who didn't understand English, looked puzzled. There are things you can and cannot say, even as a boss. He can say whatever he wants about me. I've been ready for it since I married you, Michelle said as she tugged at my sleeve. That's when it happened. The private room's door opened, and a foreign woman escorted by an employee came in. Emma, over here, everyone, let me introduce you to my wife, Emma, Richard said, standing up. Emma was a tall woman, around 60 years old. When she took the seat next to Richard, she glared at Frank and began speaking in fluent English. I heard what was being said. I am very displeased right now. Apologize to them immediately, she demanded sternly, leaving Frank open-mouthed and frozen. I'm also 9 years older than Richard. What's so wrong with a wife being older than her husband? The notion that a woman needs to be younger to be appreciated is repulsive to me. Emma was fuming. Frank turned as white as a ghost. In a panic, he bowed his head to Emma. I'm terribly sorry. Not to me. Apologize to him and her, Emma said, still angry. Then Frank turned to me and my wife and bowed deeply. Steve, and to your wife, I'm terribly sorry for my rudeness. Please forgive me. Unaware of the situation, Emma told the whole conversation to Richard in Spanish. Richard's face turned red with anger. What a rude man you are. I don't want to dine with someone who speaks so thoughtlessly. I'm leaving. It was Emma who calmed down the fuming Richard, who had shouted in Spanish. Well, he has apologized, so let's forgive him. No way, I can't forgive him. Please leave now and never make such comments again. Richard's anger did not settle, and Frank, still pale, went home with his wife, looking downcast. Then, we introduced ourselves to Emma again. Pleased to meet you, I'm Michelle, the wife of Steve Richardson. Hearing Michelle introduce herself, Emma's eyes widened. Michelle, are you Michelle Richardson? Yes, that's me. Oh, my God. I'm Emma Anderson, your email friend. Excited, Emma switched to speaking in Spanish. What? You're Emma? Michelle also looked incredibly surprised. The two of them joyfully clasped hands over this coincidence. Listening to their conversation, it turned out they had met on an internet forum and had been exchanging emails for over 20 years. Michelle had taught Emma English, and Emma had been teaching Michelle Spanish. So that's why Emma could speak English. Michelle was too shy, so they had never done a video call before. It seems they didn't know what each other looked like. What an amazing coincidence, though. To meet an email friend from overseas like this, and at such a place. The party really got going with Emma and Michelle's conversation at the center. The food brought out was delicious, and Richard and Emma enjoyed it too. Man, what a great day. I can forgive Frank's remark, but I'm truly happy that Emma and Michelle met by chance. Richard had also heard about Emma's longtime email friend before. I've really been looking forward to trying authentic Italian cuisine, and I'm totally satisfied. I'll be sure to tell the folks back at the headquarters in Spain about this. After the meal, saying this, Richard left with Emma. It seems the dinner was a success. Later that day, back at home, Michelle said to me, Steve, thank you for standing up to Frank earlier. I acted tough, but if you had gone along with Frank, it would have really shocked me. I'm relieved and glad that you stood up to him. Of course I'd stand up to anyone. I can't tolerate anyone talking awful about my dear Michelle. But, Michelle, you said you were prepared for this when we got together. I had no idea you felt that way. Gotta admit, it was a bit of a shock. But we have a 14-year age gap. I don't exactly look young, and to outsiders, our age difference is pretty obvious, right? I was braced for some remarks. It was a relief that your parents didn't object and were supportive of our marriage. So that's what it was. You needed that kind of resolve to marry me. Still, thanks for marrying me, Michelle. Don't mention it. The happiness I feel being with you makes all that trivial. Michelle said this with a bright smile. Seeing her smile, I fell even deeper in love with her. A few days after Richard returned to Spain, my company called to say a major deal with his company had gone through. Richard had made a point of sending his regards to me. Apparently, Richard had also reported Frank's nasty comments to the headquarters, and as a result, Frank got demoted to a regular employee. And in his place, I was promoted to department head, effectively reversing our positions. Since that day, Frank stopped making condescending remarks towards me. He became utterly submissive, and seeing him bow was incredibly satisfying. Michelle and Emma continued to exchange emails and calls, staying good friends. It looks like Michelle is now planning a trip to Barcelona where Emma lives. Watching her talk excitedly about it, I want to protect that smile for as long as I can. I want to make her happy. That's what I thought. One day, I saw my fiancée, who was soon to be married, walking arm in arm with some guy I didn't recognize. After a night shift, I was driving to pick her up. This city, on the cusp of Christmas, was brightly decorated and the faces of the people bustling about were cheerful. From inside the car, even my heart, against my usual demeanor, felt festive. I'm Jim. Working in real estate, I always pick her up from her job on my day off, Wednesday. Her name is Anna. We met through a colleague, Brandon, and have been dating for 3.5 years. Anna is a nurse. Never having been hospitalized myself, my only knowledge of what a night shift nurse does comes from the stories Anna tells me. But seeing the sheer exhaustion on her face as she gets into the car, I understand it's no easy job. Today, she looks especially spent. Rough day. Oh, you look beat, I say. Can you tell by my face? Oh, I hate that. Saying this, Anna bashfully covered her face with her hands. Her gesture was so endearing, I just wanted to hug her right then and there. But I'm driving. Must resist. You seem really sleepy. Maybe we should postpone the venue viewing for another time. We had plans to go check out a wedding venue. Jess, we are getting married. We've introduced each other to our families and are in the midst of deciding on the venue and the date. Let's go since we're all here. I'm fine, really. Plus, I've been looking forward to today for so long. As she said this, Anna's eyes were sparkling. Next, we're headed to a small chapel on the outskirts of town. It was the first place Anna had suggested. Choosing a humble venue over a fancy hotel really shows her modest and gracious character. It was a much better place than I imagined. On the way back from the chapel, looking at the brochure, Anna said excitedly, "Should we just decide on that place? I think I want to check out a few more places. Anyway, I want to get married as soon as possible," I said, and Anna nodded happily. Having the person I love by my side, smiling at me. I can't imagine anything happier than this. I will definitely make her happy. That's a promise I made to myself. But suddenly, those happy days came to an abrupt end. It happened one day. Working overtime, I noticed my coworker, Brandon, lingering around me, looking like he wanted to say something. Come to think of it, Brandon has been acting strange since this morning. I figured he might have a stomach ache or something, so I just kept working. Couldn't you just ask what's wrong? Impatient, Brandon finally approached me. What's up? You need something? No, it's hard to say here. Reluctantly, I let Brandon drag me to our usual tavern. After taking a sip of the draft beer that had been served, I turned to Brandon. So, what is it you wanted to tell me? Well, you see, Brandon mumbled, hesitating. I let out a big sigh. If you just wanted to drink, you should have said so from the start. It's not that. Just calm down and listen, all right? Typically when Brandon starts like this, it's usually some trivial story. About how the lady at the office greeted us with a smile, or about the boss walking with a young woman. Did you catch the branch manager in an affair? I said, browsing the menu. That's it. Brandon nearly stood up as he pointed at me. I couldn't care less about the branch manager's flings, to be honest. It's not the branch manager I saw, it's... As I shifted my gaze from the menu to Brandon's face, he was looking at me with a strangely serious expression. A bad feeling started to creep over me. No way, I thought. Jim, I heard you're about to get married, and I didn't want to stir the pot, but you're my colleague and a good friend. I was the one who introduced you to Anna, my friend from college days, so I have to tell you." My heart started racing. With my palms starting to sweat, I waited for Brandon to continue. "I saw it, man, Anna walking arm in arm with another guy." I felt the blood drain from my face. This is a sick joke if it's meant to be one. It's no joke. At first, I thought I was seeing things, but look at this. Brandon showed me a picture on his phone. It was taken from behind, but it was definitely Anna. She was wearing the turquoise blue scarf I gave her last Christmas, walking arm in arm with a man, as if they were supporting each other. What does this mean? I tried to think rationally about the situation, but my mind wouldn't work because of the shock. It just can't be. Anna wouldn't do something like this. Betray me like this. After parting ways with Brandon, I immediately called Anna and told her, "I'm coming over now." Then, I hopped into a cab and headed to Anna's place. When I rang the doorbell, Anna quickly unlocked the door and greeted me. "What's up? You surprised me, coming over all of a sudden." She must have been getting ready for bed. Her hair was still damp and loosely tied up, with a cardigan thrown over her nightwear. As I stepped into the room, I began without turning to face her. "Brandon says he saw you walking arm in arm with some guy I don't know." The air suddenly tensed up. Despite the heating being on, it felt like the temperature in the room was dropping fast. Anna remained silent. "Brandon's just mixed up, right?" My voice trembled pathetically. Anna was still quiet. The only sound in the room was the irritating tick of the alarm clock by the bed. And then, "It's not a mix-up," she said in a faint, thin voice. An uncomfortable silence spread once again. Unable to bear the quiet, I laughed it off. "You guys are pulling my leg, aren't you? Cut it out. I'm really bad with this kind of prank." As I sat down on the couch, Anna sat a little distance away. "Listen, I've decided to break up with you and start seeing him. I was going to tell you soon, but it slipped out now." Anna's face was serious. To me, it seemed like something from another world, and I couldn't help but burst into laughter. Laughing hysterically as if I'd lost my mind, Anna continued, "I'm going to date him." "Him? Who is he?" "He works at a nightclub." "A nightclub?" The guy in the photo looked pale, with delicate features, almost unhealthy. Now that she mentioned it, he did look the part. "What about getting married?" "I never planned on that from the start. Even after introducing you to my parents, that was all you're doing. You've betrayed me." "I was never serious. It was just a game. An adult should understand that, right?" For the first time in my life, I felt the urge to hit someone. This strange laughter had vanished, and my heart was rapidly filling with despair and intense anger. Then, I hurled every curse and insult I could think of at Anna. I was surprised at myself for being able to come up with such filthy words. "Get out. I don't even want to see your face anymore." With those words, a single tear trailed down Anna's cheek. It felt so phony. Betraying me and running off with someone else. I grabbed the photo frame that caught my eye. Displayed was a selfie of us at the Santa Monica beach. That's when I popped the question. She was so happy then. I violently threw the photo frame into the trash and left Anna's room. That was the end of our story. From then on, I threw myself into work, trying not to think of Anna. Once I started thinking about it, I couldn't stop. I was driven by a desire to erase it all. Drowning in work as if to inflict pain on myself, with a deeply wounded heart. Nightly, I drowned my sorrows in booze with Brandon and the juniors, forcing myself to sleep. I'd become dependent on alcohol to sleep. But it was my junior, Lucy, who supported me. She worried about how gaunt I was getting and gave me a thermos of warm soup. Her kindness thawed the ice in my veins, warming me through. Eventually, Lucy and I started dating. Brandon, who had a thing for her, grumbled a bit, but he genuinely congratulated me, wishing me happiness as I sought it anew. He was worried about me too, considering I'd been on the brink of self-destruction. 2 years after splitting with Anna, Lucy and I got hitched. Betrayal from someone I loved with all my heart. It shattered my soul to pieces, to the point I thought I couldn't stand up again, but thanks to Lucy, I've been able to open up my heart to love once more. I overcame it because she was there. Now, I want to be there for her. I was determined to make Lucy happy for the rest of our lives. A year later, the season of Christmas returns to our town again. The familiar scenery, now lit up with Christmas lights, made my heart skip a beat. No matter the age, Christmas always brings that excitement. I looked around, scanning the shop windows for the perfect find. Today, I was on the hunt for Lucy's Christmas gift. Gloves were last year's gift, and jewelry just lacks originality. Maybe splurging on an electric bike would do the trick. As I pondered, a familiar profile caught my eye. It was Anna. She was wearing the turquoise blue scarf I gave her, pushing a wheelchair. The man in the wheelchair must be the guy from that photo. He works at a nightclub, doesn't he? I thought he'd be out of the picture soon enough, but they're still together, huh? A dark flame began to burn in the pit of my stomach. I couldn't contain my hatred and stepped forward to confront them. "Hey there," startled by my sudden appearance, and his eyes widened. "Jim, still using that scarf, I see." "Yeah, well," my gaze fell on the man in the wheelchair. The guy, with his black beanie, didn't so much as glance our way, just kept looking straight ahead. I felt a surge of arrogance at his demeanor and couldn't help but throw a sarcastic jab. "Had an accident. That's what you get for stealing someone's girlfriend. Serves you right." I admit, it was a mean thing to say. But the guy said nothing back. As I was about to yell at him, and it cut in. "We're in a hurry," and with that, she pushed the wheelchair past me. I watched them go, feeling oddly satisfied. I'd always wanted to give that guy a piece of my mind. After all that, he didn't have a comeback. It makes sense, though. He's the one in the wrong, so he couldn't say anything. At that moment, I felt no remorse, almost smug about their misfortune. Days later, I was on a business trip. This is where Anna's parents live. I've been here before to meet them, back when things were good. If I remember right, there's a decent diner behind the station. After wrapping up a meeting with a client, I decided to grab a bite to eat. As I walked down the main street, I saw familiar faces coming my way. They were supposed to be my in-laws, Anna's parents. Is this kind of coincidence even possible? No, they live around here, so it's not odd to see them shopping in town. Yet, there are two people who have nothing to do with me anymore. Should I just pretend I don't know them and pass by? As I was mulling it over, Anna's mom looked my way and our eyes met. My heart skipped a beat, and I quickly looked away. "Jim," despite my silent plea not to be noticed, Anna's mom called out my name. Her voice, which I hadn't heard in years, sounded weary. "It's been a while." "You look well, that's good." "Well, how could I be? How could I possibly be okay? Thanks to Lucy, I've picked myself up, but do you have any idea how much your daughter made me suffer?" Annoyed by her thoughtless words, I forced a smile and said, "So, Anna dumped me like trash and is living happily ever after with someone else who works at a night bar. Well, good for her." "What?" The two of them looked puzzled. Don't tell me they didn't know about the guy's job. Yeah, I was shocked to learn that Anna had become such a player. Speaking of which, did that host guy get into an accident? Must be karma, what goes around comes around. I expected them to snap at me, but instead, they just looked at each other, confused. After a brief consultation, Anna's mom turned to me and said, "Did Anna actually tell you that?" "Yeah, she did. Didn't you know? We've known him since she was little. He's not." "What?" Anna's mom chose her words carefully, trying not to hurt me. Anna's mom told me this. The man in the wheelchair wasn't her enemy guy or anything. He was Anna's childhood friend. And also the one who saved her life. Anna was born with a heart condition and occasionally had attacks when she was a child. During her middle school years, she had a severe attack while walking home alone and collapsed on the side of the road. Thankfully, he came by and called an ambulance, which likely saved her from a worse fate. It was a road not many people traveled, so if he hadn't passed by, help might not have come in time. From then on, until they graduated middle school, he always made sure to walk her to and from school, always ready to assist if something happened. Due to all this, Anna and her parents couldn't thank him enough, feeling an immense sense of gratitude. His kindness also inspired Anna to want to save others, which led her to pursue nursing. But even hearing this, I couldn't accept it. Even if he was her lifesaver, it doesn't give him a reason to treat me so poorly and cause me such pain. I didn't sugarcoat it. I threw these words right at Anna's mom. After a brief hesitation and with a trembling voice, she replied, "He has, else." Afterward, I managed to get back to work, but her words stuck with me. else, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. I had heard the name before. Once home, I opened my laptop and searched for information about the disease. It's a progressive disease where muscles stop working as you'd expect, making it difficult to speak clearly and swallow food. Eventually, the muscles needed for breathing weaken, and a ventilator becomes necessary to extend life. And once it starts, the symptoms never get better. I heard the front door open. Looks like Lucy got back from work. In a panic, I shut the laptop. "I'm home." "Hey, what's wrong? You look pale." "It's nothing. I might have done something terrible." Even if I didn't know, to be so rude to someone suffering from such a terrible disease. I felt like I was being torn apart by intense regret. He didn't ignore me. He just couldn't turn to face me. I owe Anna, and her childhood friend, an apology. I'm gonna take a walk for a bit. With Lucy giving me a puzzled look, I grabbed my phone and left the house. My breath was white in the cold air. Before I knew it, it was already past the 20th of December. My hands were numb from the cold as I fumbled with my phone, trying to find Anna's number. This was the first time I was calling Anna since we broke up. Would she pick up? After a few short rings, I heard Anna's familiar voice. "Hello, it's me, Jim." That's all I could manage before we both fell silent. I still hadn't figured out how to apologize. The north wind was piercing my cheeks. A feeling of inadequacy overwhelmed me, squeezing my frozen chest tight. Anna was the first to break the silence. "You heard from my mom about him." "Yay, about that. I'm really sorry for what happened before. I don't expect forgiveness, but no, it's me who should say. Actually, he's been wanting to see you. Can you meet him tomorrow? To see me?" I wasn't feeling up for it, to be honest. But I felt I had to. I was the one who said he deserved divine punishment. I need to apologize face to face. We agreed to meet at the coffee shop in front of the station the next afternoon and hung up. The next day, I arrived at the coffee shop an hour earlier than the scheduled time. I couldn't settle down at home. I couldn't gauge Anna's feelings through the phone call the day before. Was she angry? or was she sad? After about half an hour, the cafe's door opened, and I saw Anna coming. She was pushing the wheelchair just like she had been the other day. When she spotted me, she deftly changed the wheelchair's direction and headed straight towards me. I gave a slight nod and watched her approach. "You're pretty early, aren't you?" Anna said with a weary smile. That unchanged smile of hers made my old wounds ache. "It's been a while, so he is. He's Kevin, just like my mom told you. He is my childhood friend. He can't move or talk normally anymore." Anna spoke while wiping Kevin's hands with a wet wipe. I didn't know what to say and just stood there awkwardly watching. After carefully wiping his hands, Anna bowed deeply to me. "I'm really sorry about that time." I was terribly shaken, thinking that I should be the one apologizing, and I couldn't even respond. Ashamed, I cast my eyes downward. No matter how I try to explain it now, it won't change the fact that I betrayed you and hurt you, but I need you to hear this. Anna continued. At that time, Kevin's illness had already progressed to the point where walking alone was difficult. Even if we thought to go for a walk for a change of scenery, during the bright hours when people were around, someone would laugh at his awkward gait or say something heartless. So it became our routine to walk together on less crowded streets late at night. Hearing this, I wished I could just disappear from the spot. The one who had said those heartless words, wasn't that me? I would take Kevin's arm and walk slowly, with me beside him. What Brandon saw was just that. Brandon did indeed see Anna. But she wasn't leaning on him out of dependence, it was to support Kevin. Then why? You could have just explained all this to me. And I'll look down sadly when she heard this. The words that finally came out of my mouth were accusing Anna. No, that's not what I want to blame her for. I was disappointed in myself for not being able to express my feelings properly. Then, still looking down, Anna whispered, "Kevin's parents are gone, so I'm the one to support him." It struck me. Of course, that explains everything. She distanced herself from me to take care of Kevin. Why make up a lie about his job? That should have been obvious. Did you lie? For my sake. It's not your fault. I didn't want to burden you with this repayment. If you knew, you'd definitely say you wanted to shoulder it too. You're a very kind-hearted person. What is she saying? That's for my sake, isn't it? Just as Anna said, if I had known back then, I would have definitely decided to shoulder it with her. Knowing that, Anna did something that would make her be disliked. Anna. She gave up her own happiness for her benefactor. As I stood there dumbfounded by the harsh truth thrust upon me, Kevin let out a short cry. Anna listened carefully and began to speak a few words. I remembered seeing it back in high school during a health class. It was a way to communicate with people who couldn't speak, using mouth shapes. Anna used this method to understand what Kevin was trying to say. Kevin said, "I didn't know you were engaged. Dump me and let's start over. Silly, I've told him that I'll never leave him for the rest of my life." Kevin, unable to move his facial muscles, appeared expressionless, but his eyes seemed to carry a hint of sadness. Unaware of Anna's turmoil, that day I cursed her out in a fit of anger. "Is there anything I can do to help?" To my question, Anna shook her head gently with a small smile. "Live your life. Be happy." Under the table, I clenched my fist tightly. I felt so powerless that I wanted to punch myself in the face. I certainly loved Anna back then. If Anna is struggling, I want to support her somehow. If she has chosen her path, I want to walk beside her. But I swallowed my words and looked straight into Anna's eyes to say, "I respect your strength. I'll always be rooting for you. So please, find happiness, Anna." Anna nodded slowly, with the same gentle smile she had 3 years ago. She waved her hand slightly in front of her face before turning her back. As I watched her in a daze, Anna turned around as if remembering something and said to me, "Merry Christmas, though it's a bitterly. We probably won't see each other again. But I hope you will be happy. May your chosen path be filled with light." I closed my eyes and prayed earnestly. When I got home, Lucy was decorating the Christmas tree. She was stretching to put a star-shaped ornament on top of the tree, taller than herself. "Welcome back. Hey, can you put this on for me? I can't reach." I took the star from Lucy. I wish such brightness would shower upon Anna and Kevin. May darkness stay away, and only overflowing happiness embrace them. With that thought, I became so wistful that tears began to fall uncontrollably. Surprised by my sudden tears, Lucy looked into my face with concern. I hugged Lucy desperately and told her I loved her over and over. I will live my life and be happy with Lucy. We will cherish each other and live happily ever after. I made that promise in my heart. My wife was having an affair. I found out about this through a private investigator I had hired. The detective mentioned that he could look into the guy's identity for an extra fee, but I decided to stop there. That's enough. All that's left is to confront my wife. Sadness, anger, emptiness. A whole mess of emotions all mixed together like clay. My name is Michael. I met my wife, Lucy, on a matchmaking website. She had this classy vibe, and when she smiled and showed her dimples, I was instantly smitten. After a year of dating, we get married. Our wedding was a happy occasion, blessed by everyone. Lucy looked gorgeous in her pure white wedding gown, and I swore to myself that I'd protect this bride for the rest of my life. However, a year into our marriage, I noticed something was off with Lucy. Lately, she'd been putting on more makeup and smelling like perfume. I'm glad she wants to stay beautiful, but the sudden glam up was conspicuous. And she stopped using her cell phone in front of me. It was as if she was secretly communicating with someone. Seeing her like that made me think the unthinkable. I didn't want to imagine it, but I asked a detective to check if my wife was cheating. Weeks later, the detective hit me with evidence photos of Lucy arm in arm with some guy in neon-lit streets. Ironically, when I got the report from the detective, Lucy was supposedly on trip with friends. Of course, that was a lie. The trip was actually with her lover, a tidbit the detective shared as a freebie. I went home to find myself sitting alone on a chair in an empty living room, crying quietly. Tears dropped onto the white table. This table was a memento from before Lucy and I got married. I want to prepare delicious meals every day and set them on this table. I was thrilled to hear those words from Lucy, smiling at me with her cute dimples. It's exactly why I couldn't stop the tears. I was up all night waiting for my wife, who would return tomorrow. The next day, I heard the door open. Lucy entered the house and jumped a bit when she saw me in the living room. "Wow, you're here, weren't you at work? I took a day off today." Lucy said, "Oh, I see," and tried to go put away her things, but I stopped her. "I'm sorry, I'm just really tired from the trip," she said, trying to continue on her way, but when I scattered the affair photos on the white table, her face went pale. "Hey, who is this guy? Why would you do this?" Anger and sadness made my voice shake. Lucy initially turned pale, but gradually her expression became emotionless. The white table we bought together, filled with love and promises of daily delicious meals. Now, it was lined with evidence of her infidelity, something so far from love. She just stared at it. "Say something. I know you went on that trip with him." Then, Lucy showed her teeth in a smile. The moment that adorable dimple twisted, I felt a chill. "Oh well, cat's out of the bag. I thought I could get away with it because you're so clueless." Lucy's cold, unfamiliar tone left me speechless. She dropped her travel bag carelessly on the floor and pulled out her cell phone. "If you're so eager to know, should I introduce you?" Suddenly, she started making a call. "Hey, sorry. Yeah, looks like he found out. Can you come over to my place?" She was calling her lover. And within minutes, this lover arrived at our house. It seemed he was just returning from dropping Lucy off and had to turn around and come back. This man entered our home as if he owned the place, without a greeting, and laughed, saying, "Whoa, what a cramped place. Hey Lucy, so you got busted, huh? Looks like it." Apparently, he hired a detective or something. Wow, seriously, that's creepy. They were all over each other in front of me, flaunting their affair. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare. "So, Michael, I'm marrying this man. Can we break up?" Lucy said that, and I was like, "What?" Completely dumbfounded. Then she criticized me for not having enough money. Simply put, she was leaving me for a wealthy guy who owned his own company. Indeed, her lover had that nouveau rich air about him. He was just the type of man my brand-loving wife would fall for. I thought I should grab him by the collar since he stole my wife, but he had such an intimidating look that my legs just gave out from under me, pathetically. Lucy didn't show a hint of remorse, even when we discussed our future. She was glued to her lover instead. She said she didn't need any share of our assets and wanted a quick divorce. And apparently, she had no intention of paying alimony either. I couldn't find the words to fight back against Lucy and her lover, as they freely spouted nonsense after their infidelity. I just couldn't wrap my head around it. Amidst all this, her lover said something outrageous, laughing. "Hey, if you don't mind leftovers, you can have my ex-wife." It took me a moment to understand, but it seemed like he was already married too. So, it was a double affair. Hey, why not? Take his wife. You dumped folks should get along just fine. Lucy added, laughing. Unbelievable. What is wrong with these people? Unable to stand their hurtful words, I told them to just take their stuff and leave, and I stormed out of the house. Their laughter echoed in the living room. I just wanted to run away as far as I could, right then. Damn it, damn it, damn it. That's when I was wiping my eyes, blurred with tears. I couldn't see, and I bumped hard into someone in front of me. I heard a scream. I quickly apologized, realizing it was a woman I had bumped into. To my surprise, she was crying too. A woman, standing in front of my house, weeping. My intuition kicked in. "Excuse me, by any chance, are you the wife of the man who went inside?" I asked. The woman, with a look of shock, wiped her tears with a handkerchief and silently nodded. Afterward, we decided to talk things over and headed to a nearby cafe. The other woman's name turned out to be Susan. When I heard her out, it seems Susan had her suspicions about her husband's infidelity and had been investigating it. And then, she managed to track down the home of the other woman, who is my wife, Lucy. By chance, Susan saw him dropping Lucy off at my place while she was in a cab. Seeing her husband's car suddenly make a U-turn and come back, she figured if he was still not done messing around with his mistress, she might as well confront them, so in a fit of anger, she came right up to my house. But then, hearing the laughter of her husband and Lucy through the window, and her husband's words, "I'm giving you my ex-wife," hit her ears, and a wave of sadness overwhelmed her. She stood frozen, crying right there, and that's when she bumped into me as I rushed out of the house. That's the story I got. I explained my own situation to Susan. How I'd been betrayed by my wife. I'd hired a detective, and that's how I found out about the betrayal. And that my wife had just asked me for a divorce right then and there. Susan just listened quietly to everything I had to say until the end. "Well, we're both going through a tough time, aren't we?" I said tentatively. Susan replied with a self-deprecating laugh. I did want to believe in my husband, you know. Turns out, it was all for nothing. After that, we both fell into a silent pause. Accepting the reality of being betrayed and abandoned by the partner we loved took time. I'm sure Susan felt the same way. It was just when the waiter set down a refill of the coffee I had ordered. With a bit of difficulty, Susan said to me, "I'm sorry if this is out of line, but would you mind if I stayed at your place for a while?" I stopped stirring the milk into my coffee. She then explained that she married her husband against her parents' wishes and now had no one to turn to. Her friends are few and far away. Her husband controls the money, so she can't use it as she'd like to. Probably by the end of the day, her husband will tell her to leave the house. That's why she is pleading to work as a housekeeper and look for a house and a job at the same time, even if it's just for a little while. I was lost in thought while stirring my coffee, not saying a word. Then, Susan said with a sad smile, "I'm sorry. I've made an unreasonable request. Please forget it. My family warned me so many times not to marry that man. I regret not listening to them now. It was stupid of me to get involved with such a man." Saying that, Susan picked up the receipt and stood up from her seat. After bowing to me, she tried to leave the restaurant. Susan will have to leave the house where her husband lives. And the woman who will replace her is my wife, Lucy. I have a duty to help Susan. As she walked past me, I grabbed her hand. Susan looked at me in surprise. Her hand was freezing cold, and I gripped it even tighter. "To be honest, I'm not good with household chores, so I'd appreciate the help," I said with a laugh. When I said that, Susan replied, "Are you sure? It's a live-in position, you know." "Of course, it's fine. Just so happens I have a room free starting today," I told her. I went home, surprised by the drama unfolding on the day I was confronted with divorce. Susan packed her things and came to my house. We were both tired, so we headed straight to bed. I had Susan sleep in Lucy's room. The next morning, when I woke up, the clock read 6 a.m. It was earlier than my usual time. I thought about getting some more sleep, but the good smell lured me to the living room. To my surprise, there was breakfast on the table. "Good morning," said Susan in an apron, standing in front of the stove. "Wait, Susan, did you make all this?" "Yes. I'm not sure if it'll be to your taste, though." After eating, I couldn't help but exclaim, "Delicious." I hate to bring it up again, but my ex-wife, Lucy, used to say she wanted to make me breakfast every day. However, she wasn't a morning person, so I hardly ever got breakfast from her. In hindsight, that should have been a sign of her dishonesty, I thought as I sat in front of Susan's cooking. I'd been settling for convenience store breakfasts, so having a warm meal after so long made me feel really happy. "Also, here's a lunchbox for you." I was surprised that she'd already prepared a lunchbox without me knowing. Later at work, when I opened my lunchbox, the food was beautifully arranged. And there were even veggies, making for a well-balanced meal. Susan's thoughtfulness was evident, and it touched me. My colleagues even complimented me. "Hey, your lunch looks great today. Your wife is amazing, huh?" I just smiled wryly and replied, "Right." From then on, having balanced meals every morning and evening, I noticed a positive effect on my work. I started landing new clients one after the other, leading to top sales that month. To be honest, I was surprised at myself. All thanks to Susan. Coming home to a house without a speck of dust, a testament to a perfect housekeeping. And it was Susan's smile, saying "Welcome back. Was it a long day?" that gave me courage. Gradually, the time I spent talking with Susan at breakfast and dinner became a healing time for my heart, scarred by my ex-wife's betrayal. One day, to express my gratitude, I invited her to dine out, saying, "Why don't we eat out for a change? I'm sorry. for presuming to go to such a fancy place when I'm just staying your place," Susan said apologetically, but I shook my head. "On the contrary, I'm sorry I can't do more than this. I'm truly grateful for everything you've done, Susan." When I said that, Susan blushed and I was taken aback. Right when the meal was nearly finished, Susan said, "This may not be the right time to talk about this," and showed me a paper. It was a claim for alimony from her ex-husband. Apparently, she had consulted with a lawyer and started the process of claiming alimony. Her ex had some complaints, but it seemed she was able to receive the payment successfully. Since I was receiving alimony from my ex-wife around the same time, I had anticipated that Susan would get hers too. "I managed to get some money, so now I can afford to rent an apartment," said Susan as she bowed her head to me. "Michael, thank you so much for letting a stranger like me stay in your home." I was silent for a moment, but quickly put on a smile. "I should be the one thanking you, Susan. You've helped me get through all this. Really, thank you." And with that, I bowed my head. When I looked up, Susan was staring at me as if waiting for something. We looked at each other for a while. But then, "Time's up," said a waiter's voice, and our special evening came to an end. Afterward, we went home with few words exchanged. The next day, after thanking me, Susan left the house. Looking at the now spacious house, a sense of emptiness began to settle in my heart. Months later, suddenly, the doorbell rang, and I went to open the front door. Standing there was my ex-wife, Lucy. "Long time no see," I furrowed my brow. "What are you doing here?" As I asked in a low voice, Lucy flinched and, for some reason, tears started to stream down her face. "I'm sorry, Michael, I said some terrible things." Lucy kept apologizing to me. And then, to my surprise, she said she wanted to get back together. Lucy rambled on without waiting for my reaction, explaining her situation. Apparently, her lover's business had tanked. Despite having looked down on me, just a few months later, his company went under. Not that I felt any schadenfreude towards her lover, nor did I care. I just found it annoying to have Lucy crying in front of me. "Please, Michael, let's start over." While Lucy pleaded through tears, all I could think about was how to send her away. Then, my cell phone rang. It was Susan. I answered immediately. "Hello," Susan shouted, "help me. Apparently, her ex-husband is out front of the house. And he keeps shouting, 'Please, let's make up.'" I told her, "I'm on my way, just wait for me," and I put on my shoes and opened the door. But Lucy followed me out the door, tugging at my clothes. "Please, wait, don't go, don't abandon me." I glared at Lucy, who was throwing a tantrum like a child. Feeling my anger, she slowly let go of my hand. I locked the front door slowly. There was no way for Lucy to get back in now. "I'm sorry, but I just don't love you anymore. See ya," I spat out before hurrying over to Susan's place. Standing in front of Susan's apartment was her ex-husband, who, to me, was the other man in an affair. When he noticed me, his mouth flapped open and closed, but I just glanced at him and called Susan. "It's me. I've just arrived at your door." Right after that, the door burst open and Susan came flying out and hugged me. I stroked her hair for a bit before suggesting, "How about we go out for a little while?" and took her hand. Then, the other man shouted, "Wait, Susan. It's all my fault. Please forgive me." Susan covered her ears to the pitiful cries of a man who had lost his company and his status. He's really saying the same stuff as Lucy used to say. With a wry smile, I turned back to the other man. "If you're that lonely, take my ex-wife, Lucy. Do as you please. Misery loves company. Susan and I are getting married. Don't ever show your face to us again." With that, I firmly pulled Susan's hand and left the scene. We sat down on a bench in the nearby park. "This feels like something out of a drama." Susan laughed, and I realized I was still holding her hand. "Sorry," I said, hastily trying to let go, but she gripped my hand tightly. "That thing you said earlier, about wanting to get married, is it true?" I was a bit startled but took her hands in both of mine with resolve. "It's true. I love you." Tears flowed down Susan's cheeks. "I feel the same way." A year later, we were officially married, and now we're living together. Susan is thriving as a super housekeeper. She might be what you call a good luck woman. After our marriage, I got promoted to supervisor and started being called a potential executive. And now there's a baby in Susan's belly. For the new life, I'm looking to the future with even more determination. The scars from the affair have long since vanished for both me and Susan. The dark past doesn't stand a chance against a bright future.